Have you ever noticed how some people feel calmer when they're alone? Not lonely, just safe. They don't need the room, the spotlight, or the noise. And psychology says that instinct reveals something powerful about protection, perception, and emotional intelligence. Let's break down why some people feel safest in solitude and what it really means. There are people who feel most like themselves when the world goes quiet. Not lonely, just calm, safe. You see it in the way they exhale during long drives with no music, in the way they linger in bookstores or walk without checking their phone. They don't crave escape, they crave containment. They cook in silence, sit in corners at cafes, and find comfort in nights where nothing is expected of them. Society often doesn't understand this. We've been taught that the healthiest people are the most social ones, always connected, always responding, always seen. So when someone prefers solitude, the assumption is often sadness, withdrawal, fear. But what if that's not it at all? What if being alone isn't avoidance? What if it's sanctuary? What if some people aren't hiding from the world? They're just finally resting when it lets them go? This isn't about disliking others. It's about feeling safest in the places where your energy doesn't need to be translated, managed, or spent. And that safety isn't random. It comes from somewhere very deep. See, for some people, solitude is not a preference, it's a survival pattern. A reflex built from years of having to manage too much too early. Maybe they grew up around volatility, moods that changed quickly, criticism that came sharply, spaces that never felt fully safe. Maybe they had to read the room before they could speak. Maybe they learned that being still meant being spared. Over time, their nervous system began to find quiet not just soothing, but essential. Because when you're constantly monitoring for tone, reaction, subtext, even casual social moments start to feel like work. There's a word for this: relational fatigue. It's what happens when you care too much, too fast. When you read into every pause, worry about every reply, try to manage every interaction so it doesn't go sideways. You start rehearsing conversations before they happen, replaying them after they're done, analyzing tone, scanning for hidden meanings, wondering if you said too much or not enough. It's exhausting in a way that's hard to explain to people who don't live inside that kind of mind. Because on the surface, you just had coffee with a friend, but inside you spent 2 hours managing energy you didn't even know you were spending. And eventually, something shifts. You stop reaching out. Not because you're bitter, but because peace becomes the priority. You love people, but sometimes your body feels tense in rooms where everyone talks at once. You're listening, smiling, nodding, and still a part of you is bracing. So you pull away, not because you don't care, but because you finally learned what it feels like to breathe. Now, it's not all emotional. There's real science behind this. In the brain, the amygdala is responsible for scanning for threat, social, physical, emotional. In people who are highly attuned, it stays more active during social interaction. That means even small talk can trigger a mild stress response, a raised eyebrow, a shift in tone, an awkward silence. All of it gets processed, not just cognitively, but viscerally. This is especially common in people with certain attachment styles, anxious, avoidant, or dismissive. For them, closeness was never consistent enough to feel like home. So, solitude became their nervous system's version of a weighted blanket. And this isn't brokenness, it's adaptation. Somewhere along the way, their brain decided it's safer to rely on quiet than to risk being misunderstood. Their solitude isn't a wall. It's a room where the nervous system finally stops bracing. But here's the part most people miss. Solitude isn't just protection, it's wisdom. People who feel safer alone tend to carry an entire inner world. They've spent so much time in reflection, in silence, in watching, that they've developed a kind of intuitive intelligence. They don't need applause to know who they are. They don't think in captions or performances. Their validation isn't external, it's internal. While the world measures connection in noise, some minds find truth in stillness. And that quiet isn't emptiness. It's full of observation, empathy, creativity. It's where depth lives, where insight is born. Because when you're not constantly reacting, you start to feel. When you're not curating, you start to see. You notice things others rush past. The way someone's voice changes when they're pretending to be fine. The weight behind a smile. The moment when silence says more than words ever could. And when you finally understand that being unseen doesn't mean being unknown, you begin to realize that being alone isn't a failure. It's a form of clarity. But like anything powerful, solitude has an edge, too much of it, and the peace you once sought can become a prison. You start to feel the tug of war, a desire to be close, but a fear of losing your calm, a longing for intimacy, but a deeper need to protect your inner quiet. You've worked so hard to build this safety, but now you don't know how to let anyone in without it unraveling. And that creates something subtle but exhausting. Self-protection fatigue. Always being the calm one. Always filtering your truth. Always needing time to recover from what others don't even notice. So you stay back. Not because you've stopped hoping, but because even love feels dangerous when your peace is on the line. Still, solitude is only healing when it's chosen, not when it's the only thing that feels safe. And to understand why, we have to go back. There's a reason you feel safest alone. For many, it starts early. As children, they learned that peace came only in private, that rooms were safest when they were quiet, that self-containment was the only way to stay unhurt. So they learned to listen more than speak, to watch more than express, to think before sharing anything fragile. And now, as adults, they don't need solitude to cope. They need it to feel whole. But here's the truth. This isn't a flaw. It's emotional adaptation, a skill forged from necessity. Still, healing begins when you realize solitude doesn't have to be the only safe place. It can be a starting point, not a ceiling. There's a concept in therapy called earned safety. It means learning slowly that peace is possible even with others. That regulation can happen with someone, not just alone. It doesn't happen overnight. It starts small. Maybe with one person who doesn't expect you to fill every silence. Someone who lets you be quiet without asking what's wrong. Someone whose presence doesn't feel like a performance you need to rehearse for. And that's not easy, but it is possible. Because here's what no one tells you. The people who feel safest alone often carry the most vivid internal landscapes. They notice the pause between words, the subtle shift in energy, the tremble before the laugh. They absorb life fully. They don't just exist in the moment, they observe it. They don't chase attention, they track emotion. And from that, they create art, insight, empathy. They build entire meanings from things others miss. Solitude doesn't dull them, it sharpens them. Because when you spend time with your own mind, you learn who you are without the world's narration, and that's rare. In a culture obsessed with display, choosing depth is a form of integrity. But even for those who feel safer alone, connection isn't off the table. Healing doesn't mean giving up solitude. It means expanding what safety includes. You open the door a little, you let someone in slowly. You learn how to be seen without being consumed. Because time alone teaches you what love should feel like. calm, mutual, unperformed. And when you find it, it doesn't interrupt your peace. It adds to it. It's not noise, it's harmony. And that's when you know you've stopped surviving connection and started building it. So maybe solitude isn't isolation. Maybe it's the rehearsal for a deeper kind of connection, a place where your mind stops running, where your breath softens, where your worth no longer needs performance. People who feel safer alone aren't detached. They're just learning that peace is their natural state. And from that place, they choose when, how, and with whom to share their quiet. They don't need the world to understand them, just a few people to see them clearly, gently, without demand. The rest, they save for the silence.